Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers who enjoy discussing movies and related media. And for tonight's podcast, we are delighted to welcome back on the podcast, all the way from the US, we have filmmaker and podcast friend, Charles de Lauzirika. So welcome, Charles.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad we could talk about this because I feel like in the past I've always had to struggle and be political in how I speak about certain things because I'm somehow connected to them. But this one, it's nothing but love and then later honesty after we get the first movie out of the way.
Oh, that's good to know. I mean, one of the things I love is often on this podcast I tend to feel a bit self-indulgent because, you know, most of the time we talk about, movies that selfishly either myself or Simon want to discuss. And I absolutely love it when we get a request, particularly if it's for something that I also love as well. So we're very pleased that you've asked to do this one to celebrate the 40th anniversary, which is a rather frightening fact, but the 40th anniversary of Superman the movie. So we're going to talk about that, and I guess, it spawned, 4 sequels between, Superman the movie was 78, and then we had 4 sequels up to 87, and then we had a sequel of sorts in 2006 before they decided to sort of reboot the entire thing. So, so it's exciting. I love Superman the movie. I'll no doubt talk loads about why, but first of all, Charles, I want to give you the opportunity to kick things off with this, please.
Well, it's interesting because, when I grew up, and like a lot of kids, I read comic books like crazy. I devoured them. And this is actually before, we've talked many times before about how Star Wars was kind of a huge explosion on the pop culture landscape that changed all of our young little minds. But before that, there were comic books, and I didn't really care much whether it was Marvel or DC or whatever. I just devoured comic books, and I loved all these characters, and I certainly loved Superman quite a bit. So when as a kid, it's not like I paid attention to the trades, and it was pre-internet, so it was like I didn't know things were coming in advance. But you start to see the posters around town of like this dramatic sky and this red, yellow, and blue swoosh going, through the clouds, and this kind of crystalline Superman-esque, and you start thinking, what is that? And it already seems so far beyond the comic book. It seems like it's something almost like a religious experience. It's so big and huge and up in the air. It's just this thing as a kid. I just was mesmerized by from the very beginning of the first imagery that came out. So eventually, I saw it opening weekend. At the it was the UA Warner Center 6 in Woodland Hills, California, is where I saw it. My dad took me, and from the very beginning of the film, when it starts with the kind of the old newsreel introduction, which kind of presents it almost like in this real but alternate history of ours. So already it's saying this is not just a comic book; this is something more than that. And then with those just dazzling opening credits, and the John Williams theme is just bigger than life. And, I think I was like 11 when I saw it. Everything just seemed so big, and like it was like this whole new universe was opening up for me when I watched it. But ultimately, what I really loved about the film, beyond the basic story, and the characters were delightful, and I really enjoyed the movie part of it. But I also loved the morality of it. I more than any sort of like morality tale or religious upbringing or anything I ever experienced, Superman the movie really conveyed some strong messages to me about being a good person, and that came early in the film, or within the first hour, when Jor-El is sort of downloading Kal-El on everything, in the Fortress of Solitude. And he says, "They're good people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way." And as a little kid, that blew my mind because it was sort of like it just summed up the world so well that people are inherently good. We just screw up a lot, and we need a bit of guidance now and then. And that plus the fact that Christopher Reeve, who was just, an amazing, like, born to play Superman, he had such joy and such a smile and twinkle in his eye every time he performed acts of heroism in the film. Unlike many of the other actors who have played Superman since, I mean, he really seemed to thrill and enjoy saving people and helping people, and that was a different thing, because then later you get with Batman and other darker characters, and even some of the Superman iterations we've seen, they're not enjoying it. They have like the weight of the world on their shoulders. They're like a kind of a quasi god, and they feel very, they just have so much weight to carry. And Christopher Reeve Superman was just so just playful and fun, and he loved it, and you could just see the joy in his face when he saved the president's airplane or he saved the cat in the tree. It didn't matter. He was so happy to be a good person, and that at 11 years old was pretty powerful to see. And I think it really helped me a bit, try to be a better person and try to enjoy being, a good person and doing good for other people in my own tiny little, real human way. But the film was a great inspiration in that regard.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I'm smiling here on the, I know you can't see me, but I'm smiling away at at what you've just said there, because, it's a very, very special film for me also. What about you, Simon? What was your introduction into, this film?
Well, as I'm the youngest one here, I was actually, the first one I saw was Superman 2 at the cinema. And I remember it very well that my aunt took me to see it at my local cinema down in Ealing. And I remember absolutely loving it. But then I saw Superman the movie on video. And so I didn't quite have the full cinema experience. But I love both films. I've watched them many times over the years. And of course, when I was a kid at school, we'd play Superman, and we'd when we were playing, we would do the Superman tune, that great John Williams theme tune. And so, sort of, kind of, just growing up with it, and funny enough, I didn't see the third one at the cinema. I did see the fourth one. Yeah.
Okay.
And as a kid, I loved it. I must admit, I had a good time. But, with time and experience going back and revisiting it, you can really see the seams on it. But I guess we'll get into that a bit more.
We will, yeah.
But with Charles' points about, Christopher Reeve, actually he enjoying being Superman, you can tell there's, a real joy there. The other thing I love about the original Superman is the fact that the reactions he gets from other people, because you get the reactions,
Mm-hmm.
So when he saves somebody, the whole bit with when he saves Air Force One, and you see the pilots, and one of them's going, what's happened? And the other guy turns around and he goes, don't look, just fly. I can't say what it is, but just fly. And then you just see the two pilots on the left-hand side look back again, just like they can't believe that there's this man flying, alongside them, propping up the wing.
Yeah.
The thing I love about Superman is you get the whole world building. I mean, it's nearly an hour before we see Superman. And that bit when he saves Lois Lane is great, and it gives me goosebumps. This film gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
There's several scenes that gives me goosebumps. But it's just amazing how well the helicopter crash scene holds up still to this day.
If I can jump in for 1 second, because that was a huge moment as well. And I was lucky enough when I saw it the first time, and I saw it on a big screen in 70 millimeter. So that with a completely unaware, virgin audience, to see that scene in particular. I mean, the whole film, you could tell people were into it and they loved it. But that first sort of like explosion of heroism between the music and the spectacle and the cheering of the crowds on the street of Metropolis, like that, it was like, it was just so much like joy and relief, because not only did Superman save Lois, but it proved the filmmakers indeed could make you believe a man could fly.
Yeah, it lived up to the slogan.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, even today, you can look back in the film and say, well, it's a little creaky. It's, 70s technology. I don't care. It's like, you see that with an audience. And I've seen Superman with an audience in the last few years, and they still go bananas during that scene because it's so well constructed, and there's stakes. There are people you already care about. It's just so well handled. And then again, it's the joy of it. It's like Superman is thrilled to like save Lois. The people in the street, they don't know what they just saw. They just saw this weird thing just happen, and they're cheering. And the people in the theater they just went nuts. And it was so much fun. That set the template for the whole rest of the film, because another thing you have to remember is visual effects are still kind of in their infancy in terms of modern post Star Wars visual effects. And people were still in awe of these types of things. Now I feel like everyone's blasé about it. Like, yeah, it's computers. It's a bunch of guys, at workstations just cranking this stuff out. Back then, it was like literally magic happening before your eyes. So the entire spectacle back in 1978 was, it was amazing. And I can't stress that enough. And I feel sorry that you didn't get to see the first film on the big screen. But you get it. I know you do.
78, I was like 2. So, no, saying that, I did see, I must have saw Star Wars for the first time around that point, because that was the first film I ever saw at the cinema. So I must admit, I feel really blessed as a child that I got to see these great films, these turning point films, because there was nothing like them before this, really. 2001 aside, that was like the golden age of special effects, and I grew up in that. Yeah. And it's it's amazing to think that was kind of my era. But the fact that also, I think if any other film, the Saving Lois Lane scene, would that have been it? You wouldn't have had the whole what's lovely referred to in the end credits as Superman's first night out.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you see him do the whole thing. You see him save the cat from the tree. You see him stop multiple crimes. And you also see how Metropolitans, not New Yorkers, react to it. But this is the other thing I love about Superman, is it's a very New York film. In the same way that Ghostbusters is, it feels very much part of that city. You get the feel, the people there, and I think that's something that's lacking from a lot of other Superman films that have come.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. I echo both of you. I also feel very blessed to have, if you like, grown up in that time, because I don't know what happened. It's really weird that there's a period of time that's sort of compacted together for me, and I don't know. It was when I was very young, and I don't know whether this is because, in terms of actual release dates and stuff, I think we used to get stuff maybe slightly later than you guys did in the US. I'm not too sure, but for me, there are 4 films that I remember are the first films I ever saw at the cinema. Okay, my earliest memory of any live action stuff on television was episodes of The $6 Million Man and The Incredible Hulk. Those are sort of things I remember very early on from the small screen, and that's obviously excluding anything that was sort of preschool and animated shows and all that sort of stuff. But the first movie I saw at the cinema was Star Wars. And by that point, it was already episode 4, A New Hope. So I don't know whether that means it was a re-release or what, but because I remember being, even as a kid, slightly confused by that at first. But that was the first. There were 4 films. There was basically, my mum took me to see Star Wars and Superman the movie. As I said, I don't know whether those were in the same year or not, but those were the first 2 I saw on the big screen. And then my dad took me to see Star Trek the Motion Picture and Flash Gordon. Okay, so those 4 films in particular really, really stayed with me because they were what I did with they were cinema experiences that I did with my parents. And obviously they blew me away, and I guess were somewhat responsible for shaping my interest in how movies were made and wanting to get into movies. And then everything else, I either went with, friends and their parents or whatever, like certainly Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. I remember seeing with friends and their parents. So Superman the movie was literally the second film that I ever saw on the big screen. And, I was absolutely mesmerized. I remember I do remember sort of asking Mum during the film, after about an hour had passed, where is Superman? Because obviously it does take a while, and I love that it takes a while with my adult eyes, for him to appear. But when he does, when you finally see him, and like you said, he then has that first night out in Metropolis, as it were, and the whole helicopter scene that you've mentioned and all this, I was absolutely enthralled. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps as we speak about it because I remember this so vividly. It's funny, can't remember some of the stuff I did last week, but I remember stuff when I was like, a child. But I was absolutely blown away by it, and I remember one of the things, and one of my mum's comments, and I wonder whether she said this because she wanted, to get home to do tea for Dad or something, because they were that generation. But I remember loving sitting through the end credits because I just adored John Williams' score, and I probably didn't even realize at the time it was the same guy who did Star Wars. Yeah, but I remember loving that, and I remember seeing this, which Mum thought was never ending. Nothing compared to today, obviously, but credits list of people. And, at the time, I had no idea what any of these people did. It was only sort of in the following years that I would then go and study this stuff. And like you said, Charles, I mean, I think, considering these effects were done essentially with harnesses and optical effects and early blue screen and green screen work and rear projection and all of that technology, which is very archaic by today's standards. But I really did believe a man could fly, and I've recently watched. There's been a Blu-ray release of the TV extended version, and I recently watched it, and I don't know whether I'm just being biased because of nostalgia, but to me it still holds up and looks fantastic. So I'm with you guys 100% on this.
But I mean, when it comes to the flying, Christopher Reeves just sells it. The way he sort of extends his body, or he stretches out when he lifts off. I mean, all that stuff is great. And also the fact that not only is he when he flies, he does other things as well. Like he'll wave to people and the whole smiling thing. And it's just, he sells it so well. I think if it had been anybody else, I don't think it would have had the same effect.
No, but it definitely obviously had an impression on all of us, and I guess I'm sort of between you two in terms of the age and whatever. But when I saw it, I was absolutely, blown away, mesmerized, inspired, and the same sort of feeling as when I saw Star Wars. It was just unbelievably good, and it's again one of those films that I've owned on VHS, and I've bought the DVD, 13 disc All Singing All Dancing box set that was released a decade ago or whenever it was, and I've since bought it on Blu-ray, which had even more stuff. And then of course, because they've finally now in the UK they've released the third edit, if you like, of it. So you've got the theatrical, you've got the extended director's cut, and now you've got the 3-hour TV extended cut. I got to see it with scenes that I'd never seen before, which was incredible to see. So, and I know, Charles, you said you've had that disc for some time, right?
Yeah, well, actually, I had it on VHS. I still have them somewhere, but my parents taped it for me when it was on ABC that first time back in the 70s. Wow. So it's like, I've always sort of had a special place in my heart for that version. But I do remember when, like, very much like you, watching the film and the end credits going on and on forever, that there were, like, they broke up the cast into, like, locations at some point, and there was one that said, like, golf course, I think, and it was like the president, the Secret Service, or whatever, and, like, that's nowhere in the film. I thought, why are they crediting actors who aren't in the film? And then, of course, we see the long version, and there's, like, that brief little thing at the golf course. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stories about, like, deleted scenes, and certainly the unorthodox way the film was made, shooting Superman 1 and 2 simultaneously. And then the tension that Richard Donner had with the producers. So, all of that kind of, like, creates a great behind the scenes mystique for the first two films. But to me, what I find very interesting about Superman the movie is the way Richard Donner not just brilliantly and technically directed the film, but how he tapped into so many different genres, because it begins as kind of a science fiction epic. Then it becomes this down-home slice of Americana. Then it becomes like, it's almost like a new age meditation for a bit at the Fortress of Solitude. Then it goes into a 70s crime film in the big city in Metropolis, all the snub-nosed guns and the car chases. Then eventually that's like a romantic musical comedy in a way, when the courtship of Superman and Lois. Then it becomes an Irwin Allen epic, like a disaster film. It's amazing how many different self-contained genre sort of like vignettes there are in this epic film. It's like micro epics and a big mega epic. And I think as a kid, that was another sort of reason to love it, because it never stopped giving you new things to enjoy.
Absolutely. It's definitely got all of those different layers. And, I guess, I mean, this was my introduction to Superman, really, because I may have had a couple of annuals that they used to put out over here in the UK back then in the 70s. But I don't think I really had much of the sort of comic book literature at the time. And, I guess in terms of what had been done previously, I mean, there was the sort of early, black and white Kirk Allen film serial Superman, and there were obviously the Fleischer cartoons, the Fleischer animated Superman stories. And then, of course, I remember at the time the film came out, at the time Superman the movie was sort of popular here in the UK, ITV on a Saturday morning started doing the reruns of the George Reeves Adventures of Superman television series. They played the color ones, so it was the latter seasons, I guess. And I always, nowadays the sort of world of TV and cinema is sort of blended somewhat. But I remember at the time, particularly noticing the differences between, as a kid, again, kind of fascinated at not only the similarities, i.e. the characters and the costume and, and all this, but also the differences in this. The fact that, the flying sequences, he kind of flew with his arms pointing downwards like he was lying on something, and it was quite apparent. And obviously I know this was made a number of years before the movie as well, which I didn't realize at the time. But there was that, and then also the fact that the character of Clark Kent, the mild-mannered, reporter for the Daily Planet, in those was essentially, Superman out of his costume wearing a suit with some glasses on. And the thing that, the stroke of genius, if you like, that Christopher Reeve brought to the role was the fact that okay, everybody always jokes about Superman and the fact that a pair of glasses is a hard buy as a as a disguise, as a secret identity. Why doesn't Lois and everybody realize who this is? And the sort of strike of genius that he did was, by changing not only his voice but his body language. He actually stooped so he was shorter, and he sort of took that book out of the sort of Cary Grant, bringing up baby, type performance, and just made it a totally different character. And that's what I love, because even the stuff that followed, like, in the 90s, because I'm a fan of Superman, I watched the Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman, where they'd kind of sort of taken, if you like, the characters and the sort of basic story, and they'd sort of taken that premise and they'd put it into a sort of contemporary romantic comedy type setting. But even in that, Dean Cain was just, a cool dude with glasses on when he was Clark Kent, and you just didn't sort of buy that they were two different people. So I mean, that was the thing I think is really special with what Christopher Reeve brought to the role. Apart from looking like he was literally torn from a page of the comic books at the time, and having not only his physical appearance, but the hair, the wardrobe, the costume, all of that stuff done really well. But he just brought it to life by making these choices and working with Richard Donner, I guess, on how he was going to play the character. And I just still to this day think that's really, really well done. Although, I've heard people say it's a little bit over the top and a bit corny, but I kind of love it. And I think that's the nostalgia factor, perhaps. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and I think a little bit of corn and a little bit of cheese is a delicious part of any meal. To be honest, it's fine. It's that part of that it creates the charm of the film and the character, and I think that the way Christopher Reeve played it as a friend, right? Like he says it with those piercing blue eyes to Lois on the rooftop of the Daily Planet when she says, "Who are you?" And he says, "A friend." That was like the most sacred bond I think an actor / character could make with the audience in a film like this, because he sold it and you believed it, and he was always your friend. Even in bad movies, he was still your friend, So I think Christopher Reeve will always be the Superman, certainly for me and my generation. But I think going forward, even someone like, look, I think Henry Cavill is a fantastic Superman. Jumping ahead, I think he's been great. And all the talk about him leaving the role, I actually feel is a shame, because he brought a same kind of like, I don't want to say innocence necessarily, but like just a likable, kind of upright and heroic Superman, the likes we haven't really seen since Christopher Reeve. Because I think every other one has tried to make him cool, and Superman's not cool. He should never be cool. That's why they call him the big blue Boy Scout, right? It's like he's not meant to be, like you want the Beatles, you don't want the Rolling Stones or the Who. It's like you want the original, the wholesome hero here. So I feel like moving forward, who knows what direction Superman will go in, but I do think that original kind of innocent friendship we had with Christopher Reeve Superman has been always sort of like the thing that kept those movies alive, even when they weren't that great. With the sequels, but and even in the sequels, it's like in Superman 2, which is largely made up of footage from the Superman 1 shoot. You can tell like he is a one kind of thing keeping it all together, because the second film, in my opinion, even though it's very entertaining, it's also pretty messy. Because it was two different directors kind of working at odds in post with, Donner's original footage and then Richard Lester's kind of reshot footage. That film is nowhere near as clean and elegant as the first film. It's very entertaining, but Christopher Reeve, again, is the one who keeps it all together.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, the whole thing, because obviously, I've studied the films and know this, obviously the history and the story behind it. And, I've even got the Donner cut of the movie and all of this sort of thing, and loved it when that came out. But, I have to say, as a kid, as a child, not knowing any of that stuff, when Superman 2 came out, I was as entertained by that as the original. In fact, in some respects, it might sort of seem sacrilege now a little bit, but because of all the setup that we'd had in the first film, I did kind of always like the way with Superman 2, we just kind of got on with it, and we had the bad guys who had the same abilities and all of that stuff, and yes, there was a lot of Richard Lester put his stamp on it. Looking at it now, understanding his type of films compared to Richard Donner's films, and you can kind of see a certain sort of disjointedness in tone or whatever with that, but. The Eiffel Tower bit, I actually always quite enjoyed that. The whole hydrogen bomb, that seemed very comic book. That had the sort of over the topness of a sort of comic adventure, and I always kind of enjoyed that part of the film, which was obviously not Donner's part. That was very much Richard Lester's stuff, and I sort of thought it works. And the only problem with the Donner cut, which was lovely to see, was the fact that obviously you've got the kind of audition footage in there because they hadn't shot that scene, so it's the only way they could make it work. And then of course you've got Superman spinning the earth round on its axis like sort of twice now if you watch it with the first movie, and it's kind of like, oh well, he's just going to save any problem now by turning the world back on its axis. And I know obviously that was never the original intention, but that's how it's come out because of those changes. But yeah, I mean, I always thought Superman's 1 and 2 were great. I thought it was, by the time you got to the next two movies, the problems started as far as I was concerned, when I watched it way back when. What about you guys? Do you feel the same?
Well, I just want to briefly say about Superman 2 just before we move on. As a kid, I too loved it. I didn't notice the seams, as it were, because it was this sort of epic battle between Zod and Superman. So you had one Superman against three, and it was a great concept, and it played rather well. Having gone back and watched it recently, it's not aged very well, and but it still has this interesting concept in the middle of it, and that is of Superman giving up being Superman for Lois, just becoming human, becoming Clark Kent. And I found that really fascinating. The stuff with Zod is enjoyable, even though it is kind of funny now because you think of all the memes and sort of robot chicken jokes that are made of Neil before Zod. Neil, because he says it so much.
It's camp, isn't it?
Yes, but I mean, giving them the due as a team of three, they work really well. I think when they did Man of Steel and they brought Zod back and they brought Ursula back and Nom, they didn't do it so well because Ursula and Nom were put into the background, really. I think they only had one scene. While in Superman 2 and in Superman as well at the beginning, they're in every scene. They work as a team. You can see that they are this sort of evil trio, which, as I say, they don't replicate in other films so well. So that's always I found enjoyable. I mean that that's the fact where he goes back to the diner where he got beat up by the trucker, so he can sort of have a little bit of payback. I always think
he'd been working out.
He'd been working out.
What about you, Charles? I mean, do you have sort of strong I know you really want to talk about the first movie, and I get that, but do you have strong feelings about Superman 2?
I do. And it's like, I here's the thing. I think the idea of Superman 2 is really, really strong. I mean, I remember, as a kid, being in the movie theater and seeing the teaser poster for Superman 2, which was just the three Kryptonians kind of on this like metal landscape and then like some kind of planet behind them. It had like nothing to do with the film, but it was beautiful. And I thought, oh man, these guys are coming back. Which, by the way, that's how you do a really great setup for sequels. Because nowadays it's always like a post-credits sequence, and you tease who the next villain's gonna be. And Superman the movie did it right in the very first scene, which is brilliant. You know, I went into Superman 2 with the highest of hopes. I mean, it was in the summer of '81. By the way, you guys got Superman 2 several months before we did in the States, which was interesting.
Oh, okay. I thought we were always the other way round.
Well, usually you were, but it's that was a tough one because I was reading Starlog magazine and seeing articles and reviews about Superman 2 in the UK, and we had to wait like 6 or 7 months for it to come out here.
Oh my God! All the millennials are going, hold on a second, you didn't get simultaneous release, and you mean it wasn't on home media in 3 months? What?
Bootlegged online within 12 hours of the imminent.
Exactly.
So I went into it with the highest of hopes, and in the summer of '81, there was this other film that came out. Well, there's a few films that came out, like For Your Eyes Only, which is my favorite Roger Moore Bond film. I mean, there were other movies that summer that I was excited about, but the one that I think caught everyone off guard, for a little side here, was Raiders, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, that was like, that came out of nowhere, and that completely changed my world that summer. So I go into Superman 2 expecting it to be the greatness of the first, but times 3, because now we have like the Kryptonians, right? And it's going to be this big battle. And the trailer was fun, and Non getting thrown into a Coca-Cola sign and all this big spectacle was great. And just from the very beginning, I knew something was wrong. I just knew something was off. It felt cheaper. Like there was that terrible blue screen shot of the Kryptonian security guard.
Yes.
Just standing around as Non kind of just like sneaks up behind him and snaps his neck. I mean, it was so poorly done, and it just felt cheap. And then they rehashed the entire film in the opening credits, which added probably 5 minutes to the movie, so.
Yeah. Previously on Superman.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I get it, because they were designed as kind of bookends, those two films, to each other. And in a perfect world, I still think there's some industrious fan out there who might be able to cut 1 and 2 together into a seamless experience, kind of like how they originally imagined it, I think. You'd have to do some, visual effects tweaks, but I think the Donner cut of Superman 2 it's a very interesting artifact, but it's kind of just a glorified deleted scene. It's not really a movie. But I do think the elements are there to make a much more interesting experience for the first 2 films together. But I just kind of went in with these high hopes, and then immediately the seams and the Scotch tape and the chewing gum and everything that was keeping Superman 2 together showed, like, really early on. Even Ken Thorne's score, which we have now since learned, he did an excellent job of reworking John Williams' music. But at the time, the mix was so flat and tinny, it sounded like he was conducting a high school orchestra. It was just so like it felt cheap. And now since then, it's been beautifully remixed, and now you get the full sense of what it should have been.
Yeah, I was always bothered by that when I was younger and didn't realize why until I was older. I thought the music's the same, but it doesn't sound quite as good. And obviously, well, we know they couldn't afford Williams, basically, so they got Ken Thorne, and he did a good job, and at least he used those original themes, which was fantastic. But I know what you mean. But I'd love to see a super edit, actually. I mean, thinking about it, I was worried with this TV cut that it was going to be, it wasn't going to be widescreen, and it wasn't going to be properly remastered and all of this sort of thing. And it was a labor of love for whoever did it, because it is seamless and it looks fantastic. And of course, it uses the entire John Williams score from the soundtrack, every music cue. So it's fabulous from that point of view,
No, totally. And another kind of like problem I had with the film where the visual effects were just not up to snuff with the first one, because, and again, it's sort of early in the film, I think, when the Kryptonians have landed on planet Houston, and the the U.S. military guys come out with the flamethrower, and it looked like a Warner Brothers cartoon. I mean, that animated flame was so bad. But then you think, well, how could they have back then? How could they have safely, I guess, shot fire at an actor or even a stunt person, and then somehow wind that back because of super breath or whatever. And it's like, yeah, they were technically limited, but I wish there was a better way for them to have done it than just done like cell animation, or that super ridiculous new superpower when they're in the Fortress of Solitude at the end and Superman throws that cellophane S off of his chest.
Oh, that was ridiculous, wasn't it? I was like, what the hell is that?
Yeah. Even then as a kid, when you're more forgiving, I was like, fuck this.
Like, and I didn't like the sort of being able to teleport around, that power that they kind of created for that reshoot.
And don't forget the force beam out their fingers as well.
Yeah.
The amnesia kiss.
The amnesia kiss, yes. I was going to bring that up. Yeah, it's like watching it now. You think, bloody hell, poor Lois Lane. Every time he kisses her, she'll forget. What was I doing? Who are you? I mean, in a perfect world, if Richard Donner had, been able to complete Superman 2 as planned, so that turning back the world would have, erased all this what had happened. I don't know quite. It works so well at the end of Superman. I don't know if it would have quite worked so well with the second one. I mean, he would have had to turn back. See, that's the thing. Is he turning back time or is he turning back the world? It's a little bit unclear.
I always think of it because it is the one part of the film that, I mean, okay, suspension of disbelief. We got a man from another planet who can fly and do all these wonderful things, and is disguised with a pair of glasses. But it's the one bit in the film that I've always kind of thought it is ridiculous and does slightly pull me out of it. Is the because my argument is, well, why doesn't he turn back the time for everything, kind of thing. And I think it was. I look at it as a visual representation of him turning back time rather than him turning the Earth round on its axis, because that's just ridiculous. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, the whole movie is the first film in particular is a romantic fantasy. Okay, I mean, it's basically Clark and Lois, and I feel like in turning the world back, even if it makes no sense in terms of turning back time, he did it for love. He did it for Lois. The second film, if they were to have used that same gag, it would just be to save the world. And I say just because, I mean, obviously that's the greater good, but there's something just so beautiful and innocent and pure about it being for Lois. Just for Lois. Like, he's willing to sacrifice everything for her because that's how much he loves her. Whereas if he's saving the world entire, it's because it's his job. So I think they just needed to come up with a better ending for Superman 2 if they were going to do like the supercut of the two films together. I think now it's fine the way it is now. It's just those stupid effects. I mean, I think the actual like the switcheroo with Superman being outside of the protective chamber.
I love
Tony.
That's
a great twist. That's really nicely handled.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I mean, I think it comes down to with the end of Superman 2 with Lois is, why is she so upset? I mean, that's the thing I still don't kind of get. She gets upset that, she's worried about him and, she doesn't know what to, how to talk to him or, when he's there. And it's just, it's a bit weird because in the comic books, Lois deals with the whole alter ego quite happily. So I never kind of understood the decision to make her so wet.
She's heartbroken, man.
Yeah, and it's also she's just getting used to it because, I mean, this is the first time she's had to share him with the world.
Exactly. That's the thing. She wants she wants him all to herself, like, and that's it.
Okay, taking the sort of she's heartbroken and as you say, she wants Superman all to herself and not sharing with anybody else. But it was kind of weird decision then to, do this kiss of amnesia, to make her forget just that.
It was a bit lazy, wasn't it? To be honest, it was, and I don't know whether, looking outside of the film politically and stuff, I don't know whether at that point they already knew that if they did have a sequel, that she wouldn't feature much in it, because obviously she had fallen out with the producers as well, because she had essentially taken Richard Donner's side, if you like, over the whole thing. But so I don't know whether that was why they kind of sort of rushed that in. I don't know the story about that part. Charles, do you know any more on that?
Not really. I mean, the only thing that I notice is it's very obvious when you look at Margot Kidder in Superman 2, the footage, whether it was shot by Donner or Lester, because in Donner's footage, for some reason, she just seems healthier and happier and looks better. She's stunning, and then in Lester's footage, she looks kind of like, I don't know, thin and tired, and like her hair styling is really not so great. And it's, you can definitely tell it's almost like there's two different worlds of Lois clashing in the cut. I mean, especially if you look at the scene when Zod and the others crash into the Daily Planet, and Ursa's I can't remember if she was involved in that bit, but anyway, you look at Lois and her hairstyle changes from cut to cut, and then yes, later when Ursa is sort of choking Lois at the Fortress of Solitude, same thing. Like Margot Kidder's radically changes within like frames, in terms of how she looks. So there was obviously some behind the scenes, issues going on, and I don't know. I personally think in many ways, like other films, like maybe say the Alien films or whatever, it's like 1 and 2, I think are really good, like set. Whether one is better than the other doesn't matter. It's like they tell kind of a complete story, and then once you get into 3, it's almost like they're trying to find excuses to make a movie. And I feel like 3 was definitely that. When I remember seeing the trailer, actually I saw the poster first, and it was that image of Superman holding Richard Pryor over like the Grand Canyon or whatever it was, and it's like it's like, okay, we're gonna do a comedy version now, I guess, of Superman, which is okay because the previous films had plenty of humor and comedy. But now it was really steering hard into comedy, especially with Richard Lester now fully directing, and him being a really strong comedic director. I just watched Superman 3, like I was just stunned by like how wrong it was on like almost every decision. Every decision in the film was really kind of strange and debatable.
I agree.
But the opening credits are kind of fun, of like all those like kind of mini disasters happening in the streets of Metropolis, and Superman has to kind of like deal with all these like little things, and there's a beautiful gag in there when he runs into the photo booth to change Clark and Superman, and the photos come out, and he rips it in half and gives the kid the Superman half. Like that's cute. Like that stuff is really fun.
Well, that's all pure Richard Lester, that stuff, isn't it? And it works on that level, but it's unfortunately for an entire movie. I always had problems with the direction they went. But before we get too much into Superman 3, just real quickly on this. Story of Superman 1 and 2. Obviously, it seems that the world we live in now, practically every major blockbuster film, goes through this at the moment. We seem to be in a time where directors are coming in and replacing other directors through production on pretty much every certainly franchise movie that's coming out. But at the time, am I right? I mean, I'm guessing this was sort of unprecedented at the time, yeah? Nobody, this was unique. This hadn't really happened to this level before. Am I right, or am I missing some major classic film?
I mean, the Wizard of Oz had multiple.
Oh, of course,
things, but.
I'm also thinking Tora, where Akira Kurosawa was replaced, but I don't think he had really shot anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm aware that it's happened before during pre-production, and it happened during post, in finishing films sometimes. But, in the middle of an actual major production. But then again, I guess not many films at that stage had been sort of shot back to back on this sort of, epic style like they were doing with the first two Superman movies. I guess. But
well, I first heard about the Donner version of Superman 2 in 1984. Which is only 3 years after the movie came out, and that was kind of unheard of back then for me as a fan, because I didn't realize that, I didn't as a stupid naive kid, I didn't realize, you can fire directors and you can replace them and reshoot all their footage and re-edit everything, and now that's like 3:00 on a Tuesday now. It's like that happens all the time. So, but I was, and again, this is before 9/11, but when I was a kid, you could sneak onto studio lots pretty easily, and I used to sneak on to lots quite a bit, and I snuck onto the Warner Brothers lot in '84 with some friends, and basically just wanted to check things out. And we kind of sniffed around where Goonies was shooting at the time, and so we were hanging out by, it was kind of like Richard Donner's office, and I think Amblin might have been there at the time, or Joel Silver. I can't remember. It was like this compound where all these really kind of power producers were working, and this guy with long hair and a beard kind of catches us. He's like, "What are you guys doing?" to me and my friend. And we kind of just copped to it, and we said, we're just film students, and we're just checking out, the lot. And he sat us down and just started talking to us, asking us who we were and all that. Well, it turns out this was Michael Thaw, who was Richard Donner's assistant at the time, who went on to produce the Donner cut of Superman 2.
Oh, wow.
And he told us this story about Dick directing Superman 2, which again blew our minds back then. And he told us about the scene where I think the probably more clever version of Lois pointing a gun at Clark and saying, "I'm so confident you're Superman, I'm willing to take your life." And she fires, and he flinches, and he says, "How did you know?" And she says, "I didn't. These are blanks." Right. Mm-hmm. And so we knew all that in '84. So I never thought we'd ever get to see that footage, but kind of carrying that notion for all those years, I was very happy and relieved to see they finally put it together, even though again, it's a very cobbled together thing. It was kind of fun to learn the inner workings and how they kind of make the sausage on movies at an early age, and you could be replaced and you could be reshot,
And I have to say, even though that is kind of that sort of audition footage or whatever that they used, Margot Kidder has never looked better than she did in that. I just think that she looked better at that, that test shoot thing that they did for that than in the actual movie. Weirdly, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's to do with the towel or something. I don't know. but yeah, amazing. But I must admit, one of the things, if you like, a little sort of story on my side about the Soulkinds was I used to, when I finished film school, I got an internship at Chapman Leonard Studios, but the one in Orlando, not the one in California. And I was working for an equipment rental house there called Vaughan Rental, and it was right next to Ilya Soulkind's office. Okay, and I thought this was all very cool at the time because there was loads of Superman logos, and there was this big cutout of Christopher Reeve flying on the wall and everything. But I knew the guys who worked there quite well, and they took me in one day to show me Ilya's office, and it was quite bizarre because I went in the office, and of course it had all the Superman memorabilia, which of course was blowing my mind, all of that stuff. But what was really interesting was his desk was on a platform. Okay, so that when he'd sit in his chair behind his desk, he would look down on whoever was in the meeting with him. And because of all the stories I've heard on the various DVD commentaries and documentaries and stuff, I sort of thought to myself, yeah, that kind of says a lot now. But I mean, also, of course, the reason we've got such a long TV version of this, I learned is because obviously we had loads of TV, extended TV versions of various movies that we liked at that time, so it could feel like a 2-hour, TV slot properly with commercial ads and all this. But with the Superman one, they did it over you mentioned ABC, Charles. They did it over like a 2-night extravaganza thing, hence why there's so much extra in there. And apparently the reason being is back then the networks would actually pay by the minute, and basically they went and said, like, use everything we've got, literally pad it with everything we got. So I mean, that's why we get like Jeff East walking to the North Pole for about, in
real time,
5 minutes, or in real time, yes, and all that. But at the same time, I was delighted to see all this extra stuff, But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've always been a massive fan of Richard Donner. I like loads of his movies. I love the Lethal Weapon series and all that, and I love Superman the movie. So I've always kind of been sort of with him on this whole sort of battle thing, but I don't know. I guess there's always two sides to every story, but the Soulkinds have got to be given credit for actually making this project happen in the first place, haven't they? So not to take anything away from Donner at all, but I love the stuff he was doing much better than what came afterwards. But then again, they were able to. They had that sort of successful model, didn't they, at the time?
They did. I would add, though, I think that Donner was. I don't want to like blanket and say every single director was like this, but I feel like in the Christopher Reeve movies, he was like the only one who truly loved and respected the character. And respect them in a way that, it's not like you're beholden to comic book, tropes or anything, or you have to play Superman a certain way. He definitely was very, I think, nimble in how he portrayed a then 1978 modern Superman. But he definitely had respect for the character, which I'm not sure was quite there in some of the later installments.
Yeah, he loved the old verisimilitude, as he kept saying, about the world and the fact that, yes, we've got these ridiculous things like aliens with all these powers and all this sort of stuff, but you're right, he absolutely tried to keep it grounded and respected the character and made us believe in that world, and that it was early world building, wasn't it? And he definitely did a wonderful job on that, and I tend to agree with you that Richard Lester did sort of approach it, as we see as we're going now into Superman 3, much more a comedy comic book aspect to it, and I'm not so sure it works so well. It certainly didn't for me anyway.
Though I have to say that the one thing about Superman 3 I always like, and it could have been its own film, was...
I know what it is.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say as well.
Bad Superman.
Yay!
Yes.
Yeah, it's the only bit I like about the entire film.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. And the fight in the junkyard is amazing.
That image of Superman in a bar... drinking whiskey, firing cocktail nuts into the mirror behind the bartender is brilliant. I love that bit. In fact, the day after Trump was elected president, I posted a photo of Superman taking a swig off the bottle, and I said, "Current mood."
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Yes.
Yeah. But no, I mean that is for me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Richard Pryor was incredibly funny, but that was, to me, that was a different movie. That wasn't Superman. And the problem I had with all of that stuff was just like you suspend your disbelief with Superman and in the previous film, Zod, and Ursa and whatever, having these powers and whatever. But then when you get Richard Pryor on in a pair of skis, essentially fall off a skyscraper and land, and he's fine, stuff like that. I mean, even as a kid, I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't buy this at all. I'm totally out of this movie. And, the one redeeming portion of the film was indeed the evil Superman and the fight, Superman v Superman and all that stuff was amazing. But and was all filmed in the UK, weirdly enough, in Milton Keynes or whatever. But
that's right, yeah.
But in a car park, but yeah, the rest of the film just it jumped the shark totally, for me.
I do love that in the junkyard scene. If you look carefully behind, I think it was Good Clark. Behind Good Clark is a Blade Runner poster up on the side of the wall behind him, and I always tell people Superman 3 conclusively proved that Blade Runner is only a movie.
Yes.
I have to go back and try and see that now.
Yeah.
I
must admit, I've 1 and 2. Well, particularly the first one, but 1 and 2, I tend to watch, fairly regularly, and I've watched a lot over the years. 3 and 4 less so. I did see them both on the big screen, and I have watched them on home video, and I've even listened to commentaries on both of them. But yeah, not a fan of those two. Those weren't in my head canon at all for this series.
Well, as terrible as 4 is, I mean, it has its heart in the right place. I think it wants to be a much better film than it is, and that's just because they got screwed on the money with canon. But it does have, I think, one of the best scenes of all the Superman movies, which is his visit at the United Nations.
Yes.
When he gives that speech about he's finally decided to rid the world of all nuclear weapons, and the way the music swells and the audience cheers. I get the chills just talking about it. It's like, then that's in a really bad, like, D grade canon Superman movie. This one gem of a moment that's like one of the best of all the Superman movies.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if I'm right, that was Christopher Reeves. I mean, Christopher Reeve was involved in the story and the plot and some of the writing, and the late great Christopher Reeve, which we all love. But I believe that was very much his contribution to it. But obviously, the production itself was plagued with financial problems from the Cannon Group and Masters of the Universe being made with half the budget of it and all this sort of stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, the reason why Christopher Reeves came back to do Superman, because I believe he wasn't too impressed with Superman 3, and
who can blame him?
Yeah, he wanted to put up his cowl. He wanted not to do it anymore, and
his cape.
Oh, sorry, his cape. All right.
wrong superhero.
When Cannon sort of said, "Well, what do you want to do, Christopher?" and he told him the story, that's what brought him back. But they did promise a lot more money than they actually had, and yeah, this is sort of at the downfall of Cannon. Yeah.
Oh God, it shows. I mean, this is the thing. Even though I totally agree with what you said, Charles, about this, I think in terms of the story, I much prefer Superman 4: The Quest for Peace than Superman 3. However, in terms of quality of how it looks, Superman 3 still has that, gloss that the first two films have, whereas by the time you get to Superman 4, it does look like something that was filmed earlier, because it just looks less sophisticated. And obviously, yes, the reasons why was, there was a lot less money. There was a lot of money thrown into those first three films, and a lot less money thrown into the fourth one. And it suffers for it. And also, I mean, it is silly as well. I mean, some of the stuff, the whole character of Nuclear Man. The bit that totally jumps the shark in the fourth film, which I feel even more strongly about than Richard Pryor falling off the skyscraper in the third one in Surviving, is the fact that Muriel Hemingway's character, she can survive on the moon in zero gravity with no spacesuit. Apparently that's fine. I mean, I can buy that Superman's cape blows in the wind even though there's no wind in space, and that they can have a conversation when they're fighting and all that. But the fact that they bring a human character onto the surface of the moon and she's fine, I mean, what?
I don't think that's true. I think he just carried her out into space. Only that. I don't think he took her to the moon. She was against a star field at some point without a spacesuit. That is true.
Yeah.
But it was just Superman, a nuclear man with his fabulous gold fingernails.
Yes. Yeah, they could have had a better villain, couldn't they? Let's be honest. With all the Superman, villains that there's been over the years in the comic books and stuff, they could have had something better than Nuclear Man, right?
Yeah.
How does Lex Luthor and his cousin or his nephew Lenny, I think it was
Lenny, John Cryer is Lenny.
Yeah. How do they go to the museum and cut Superman's hair with just common bolt cutters? How does that happen?
Yes,
the hair that's holding that massive weight.
Yeah. I mean, this is one thing that's kind of made me laugh, especially watching Superman 2, was Lex Luthor's voice changing and in mid scene.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
well, that's Rich Little, dubbing in because Gene Hackman didn't want to come back because of Donner, because of the Donner situation.
Yeah.
So Rich Little, who does a lot of does impressions, that's his job. He came in and did Gene Hackman, which is why when you hear things like "Haven't you guys ever heard of parachutes?" It's like that's not Gene Hackman, that's Rich Little.
Yeah.
So pretty much any time where it's sort of like an over the shoulder or a double. Or like a really obvious stunt double. It's like that's Richard. That's Richard.
Or a really wide shot. Yeah.
Well, he flat out wouldn't work with Lester, would he? He was again. He backed Donner, and
I don't think it was necessarily anti-Lester, just more solidarity with Donner. From what I understand.
Yeah. Actually, while we're on that subject, then obviously we've talked about how great we think Christopher Reeve's portrayal of Superman / Clark Kent is. We haven't talked, though, much about other characters, and obviously there's been various portrayals and adaptations over the years in the movies and the TV shows, etc., etc. What are our feelings on Lex Luthor, for example? Because I must admit, I love Gene Hackman as an actor. I think he's one of the greats, and I totally respect him and like him. However, the kind of slapstick, Lex Luthor surrounding himself with buffoons and and all that sort of stuff, I always had a little bit of a problem with that portrayal of Lex Luthor. I was always, I love what Michael Rosenbaum did in Smallville. I was obviously a massive Smallville fan. That was many years later, of course, but I love that. And I even like what John Shea did in the Lois and Clark Adventures of Superman TV series, where Lex at that point was more of a sort of equal opponent to Clark and whatever. But I don't know. I've always, even watching this extended cut, there's a lot of extra slapstick stuff in it, which really makes me chuckle between him and Otis, but and Miss Tessmacher, who obviously we love. But I don't know. What do you guys think about Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor?
I mean, personally, I think and again, keep in mind, this is like when I was 11 years old, but I loved him, and I still do, and I like the little family unit those three characters make up, and I let it slide because, first of all, he's so funny, and he's just so fun. Great. Yeah. He's so great, and then the byplay with the other characters with Valerie Perrine and Ned Beatty is also so wonderful. I mean, every single joke, like you were followed again, and then he. Otis hits the lamp.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I love it. I mean, I laugh at it. Yeah.
I mean, I love that stuff. It's so much fun. And I think it just gets you more engaged in at least what is, again, a fantasy. It's like it's a comic book fantasy. It was 1978 when it came out. To have Luthor be like this, Machiavellian badass like he would be today, I don't think that would have played as well in terms of the alchemy of what that film, what the 78 film was. I just feel like he needed a little bit of a lighter touch, which is what they did, and they did it incredibly well. And even in Superman 2, I think, Lex had some really great lines, especially as he kind of pretended to be submissive to the Kryptonians. He still had the plan all along with what was going to, happen. And I feel like, I don't know, I think it also makes him more dangerous in a way when he does, he does show that he's incredibly smart. And he hid the kryptonite in the lead box, and he had all this planned out. And he defeated Superman. It was only because Miss Tessmacher had the hots for Superman that basically he was able to save, at least half of America in the beginning.
He was smart, all right. I mean, the fact he was even able to work out about kryptonite was was pretty amazing, wasn't it?
But it seems like with Otis and Miss Tessmacher, there must be like some secret Luthor army somewhere beneath his lair, because so much stuff had to get done. Like in terms of like getting the trucks to go out and to commandeer the missiles and do that, all that stuff they had to do, where it's just the three of them. But he had so much. I mean, obviously he's rich, but he has so many resources. It's like Batman. How does Batman build the Batcave by himself without telling anyone? Even if it's just him and Alfred, how does that happen?
Yeah.
So it's like you have to just go with it, and I went with it, and I think the film rewards you if you play along with it. Because
I mean,
it's the tone of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I laughed when I was rewatching it recently. As I said, the TV cut Blu-ray that I invested in, and I was actually, yes, I was laughing out loud. I mean, particularly the, sorry, Mr. Luthor, I don't have a long enough arm, and he's like, do you want to see a really long arm, Otis, and all that. I just, and of course, in the second one, when he goes into his, Lex Luthor, the greatest criminal mind that's lived, and all of that stuff, it's beautifully delivered, and it's really, really funny. But I don't know, I just watching it nowadays, I just kind of there have been other portrayals of Lex which I guess I've preferred, just because they've been maybe a bit more serious, and you believe more that he's this genius criminal mastermind and whatever. But no, I totally respect everything you're saying, and I do. I find it very amusing. It's just sometimes it feels like it's another movie sometimes to me. But yeah, that's just me. What about you, Simon? Sorry, what do you think? I'm waffling.
You are. I won't argue with that. No, I love Gene Hackman's portrayal of Lex Luthor. It's not the classic Lex Luthor. It's not what we've had in the comics or other shows, but it really works. I really enjoy it. I enjoy all this stuff, and as Charles says, it makes him more dangerous because you're laughing at him. That you underestimate him, and Superman certainly does that. He certainly underestimates him. I mean, the fact that Lex Luthor had this plan to do this land grab by detonating a hydrogen bomb on the fault line, but then also thinking, well, Superman could try and stop me, so I'm going to have two go off, in the other direction.
And then, of course, we got wonderful things like Otisburg. Yes. or stuff like, the thing my father said to me, get out. But before that, it's so memorable. And, the other portrayals you talked about, I can't remember them that well as I do with Gene Hackman playing Lex Luthor. It works. Yeah, they were in. To be fair, they were in different things. I mean, I think this is kind of the interesting thing with Superman and the set of characters that are around him is it can be interpreted many ways, and for all the sort of, if you like, shortcomings maybe of Lois and Clark, for example, one of the things I was sort of impressed with that was they took it and they made it something else. Deborah Joy Levine, or whatever her name was, the showrunner, she turned it into essentially a romantic comedy, set in the 90s. And,
yes.
Obviously, most of what came until the Zack Snyder film, until the sort of massive reboot, even Smallville had always sort of followed very much the Donner model. And, you would have Krypton as this sort of crystalline, planets, and you'd always have music inspired by the John Williams theme, and all of those good things for very good reasons. But that show did go another way, and you're absolutely right. It can be all sorts of things. It can be funny. It can be serious, and dark, and whatever. It's all
I have to ask, what did you guys think of Supergirl?
I was never. I've not watched it in a long time, and I know there's various versions of that floating around out there as well. But I was never a. I kind of obviously liked her, but I was never a massive fan of the film. To be fair, I haven't seen it in a long time.
It's been like 30 years or so since I've seen it. So it's not, I mean, I remember being sort of unimpressed, but still also kind of okay with it. Like, it's harmless. It doesn't ruin the canon or anything. And it had an interesting cast, and Goldsmith's score was fun. I mean, it wasn't Superman, but it was still great. Jerry Goldsmith can fall out of bed and create a great score. So that was fun. And Helen Slater, beautiful and innocent, and yet very powerful and strong. So it kind of had the elements. It just didn't coalesce into something great, And it's kind of, I don't want to say it's bad. It's just kind of pleasantly forgettable. I hate to say it. So it's just like I saw it. Yeah, whatever. Next, and that's kind of like how I remember it.
I mean, I wasn't a big fan of it, but my sister loved that film back in the 80s. She used to watch it quite a bit. Film-wise, I'd say this is very different, but it's kind of like the closest it got. She had Supergirl and I had Superman. But yeah, that's probably about as close as we got, film taste-wise. But I mean, I'm like you guys. It's harmless. It tries something different with the whole sort of magic stuff, and they try to sort of show us what the Phantom Zone looked like.
Yeah, I should revisit it. There was a rumor at one point that it was going to be part of the, the big home media collection that they released for Superman, and there was rumors that it was going to include the Supergirl, various cuts of the Supergirl film as well, and it didn't. It didn't actually turn up in that set, which is sort of why I haven't seen it in a long time.
Yes,
so I know it's out
there.
Yeah, and of course it's popular on TV.
I almost clicked on it on my Black Friday purchasing on the Warner Archive site, but I couldn't quite pull the trigger on it. I looked at it and I thought I might want to buy a disc of a movie that I know that I like versus one that I kind of vaguely remember. So,
what year did Superman Returns come out?
Well, Superman Returns came out in 2006.
Okay.
Which was kind of an odd time because obviously at that point, that was kind of midway through, the Smallville run on television. So suddenly you had completely unconnected, but you had Superman on the TV and Superman on the big screen again. And well, I mean, it's kind of.
I think you just said it all there.
Yeah, I mean, I like some of the touches, but I like the fact it's a love letter to the original. But
I mean, I remember when the trailer came out, and I was just seeing like the look of it. It was like, oh, okay, this could be really good. And I liked stuff, and in the trailer, I liked some of the new touches. I liked the shot of Superman up in the heavens listening for trouble below, and then when he hears something his eyes opens and he shoots down through the sky. I thought, oh wow, this could be really good, but then of course seeing it at the cinema was really disappointed.
Actually, I had quite a good first cinema experience of that though, because it's a bit of a gimmick when you look at it now, but I went to see it. They showed it at the IMAX, and what they showed it was in partial 3D. So in other words, I mean, this was before, this was a few years before Avatar came out, so it was before suddenly everything was in 3D, yeah. And it was a bit of a gimmick, but they gave you the 3D glasses, and essentially they would put a little logo up in the corner when to put them on, and a lot of the action and flying sequences were in 3D, and the rest of the movie one. It was almost weird. It was almost like when Clark takes his glasses off was the cue for you to put yours on, kind of thing. Which, but it was a bit of a gimmick. But I went to see it that way. But I mean, the problem with it is first of all, I had trouble buying it as a sequel. Because so much time had passed, I had sort of problems buying it as a sequel to, Superman 2. I mean, not least of the fact that, all the cast was different for starters. And it was obviously, they'd set it contemporary. So they hadn't even recast it, but tried to sort of set it back in that world. And I kind of like the fact, I love the fact that they used the Williams score, and they copied the sort of opening credits, and obviously they got permission from the Brando estate that they could use some of the Jor-El footage and stuff again, which was sort of cool. But other than those things that were sort of external, flourishes to the film, I personally it didn't work for me on a number of levels. And I have to also say, in terms of casting, I've got nothing against Brandon Routh at all. But, like I said, at the time we had Smallville on TV. And for me, Tom Welling was a much better, analog for Christopher Reeve than Brandon Routh was. And it's funny, Charles, you mentioned quite earlier on about Christopher Reeve's piercing blue eyes, and I agree. To me, Superman's always supposed to have blue eyes and stuff. And I mean, Brandon Routh for me just didn't kind of work. And really, I mean, he was the least of the problems. The film didn't really work for me, but I did see it, several times, I think, at the cinema when it was out, and I obviously got it on home media as well. So even though I'm saying I didn't really like it, I've certainly spent a lot of money on it. I don't know. What about you guys?
Well, it seemed like, to me, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I love the idea of doing sort of a pseudo sequel to the first film and then sort of the second film. And I appreciate that Brandon Routh had sort of a Christopher Reeve-esque, sort of sensibility to his approach to Superman. But I think when I got into an early screening of it, like a week before it opened, and so I was super excited, and because of the trailers and because of the whole sort of Donner porn of it all, because it was sort of like let's just have like a Donner indulgence with this film, and it kind of was that. So I came out of it thinking, well, that was really not what I wanted, and that's not fair to any film or filmmaker to like say, oh, I wanted you to make a different film just for me. It's like, well, no, you had a film you wanted to make. It's not what I thought I was going to get. I thought I was going to get a return to form and a return to the original Superman that I fell in love with as a kid. And it's summed up in many ways in the shuttle rescue sequence, which is, that it's a spectacular sequence, and the plane breaks apart, and he saves the shuttle, and a lot of stuff going on, and it's a huge quantum leap forward in visual effects from the first film. But to me, where it fails, and it's a painful fail, is when he delivers the fuselage down to the stadium, and he goes in and makes sure everyone is okay, and then he comes out, and then the crowd at the baseball game erupts and cheers because Superman has returned after 5 years of being away. And for whatever reason, Bryan Singer, Brandon Routh, whoever's decision it was, had him just kind of like look at them with this sort of like, it wasn't a blank stare necessarily, but it was like this kind of like, yeah, that's right, I'm Superman, I'm a badass stare. Versus if it was Christopher Reeve, he'd be beaming. He'd be like a kid who on Christmas morning, he would be like so happy, and that to me was like, that was where Superman Returns got kind of moody and kind of stalkery in some
Yes.
scenes.
Oh,
Yeah.
big
And
time. Yeah.
and all that stuff on the Kryptonite Island was so gray and moody and gloomy, and it didn't feel like the Superman movie I thought I was going to see. Therefore, I left disappointed. And then there's like double jeopardy for me is opening night. I had already bought tickets for opening night at the Chinese, so I was going. And my friend Rob Burnett, who produced the Requiem for Krypton documentary on the making of Superman Returns, and he's actually in it as a reporter briefly. He said, "Hey, do you want to come hang out? We're going to be at the Hamburger Hamlet across the street from the Chinese." And Bryan Singer was there, so it was like we were all, like a group of people, and we're hanging out with Bryan Singer. And the entire time I'm looking at Singer, thinking, "Man, I want to tell you what I think about your movie." And the fact that I now have to watch it again, even though I don't really want to right away. I mean, maybe in the future. It was kind of a very awkward evening when I saw it that second time.
Yeah.
By the way, is that the same Robert Burnett who did Free Enterprise?
Yes.
Oh, I love that movie. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. But no, but you're right. I mean, it seemed like kind of a load of homages to Donner's film, but then it kind of missed, like you said there, with that whole choice of Superman after he saved the shuttle and stuff. It kind of missed it, and it was really weird because even with the costume and the sort of darker, the more muted color tones, it actually reminded me more of the sort of evil Superman from Superman 3's costume than the Christopher Reeve one. And I sort of thought that Brandon Routh did a better job as Clark Kent, as Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent, than he actually did as Superman. That was kind of my thought on it. I always thought that he got the Clark sort of spot on. But for me, it was just kind of lacking, and I didn't think the storyline was great, and I definitely didn't like the kind of implied son of Superman thing in that. I really hated that, and you're right, it was damn stalky to a creepy point almost. It just wasn't great.
I think it had its heart in the right place. I think they made it a decision to make it kind of more serious and less silly, quote unquote, than the Donner films because I don't know. First of all, Batman Begins had come out and had made a connection, and that got Warner Brothers probably excited about. Okay, let's do kind of like more grounded, darker takes on these materials, and that I think possibly was the decision that kind of sent that film in a bad trajectory. I think that they really should have tried to rediscover what made the first film such a beautiful, joyful experience, and not make it so dour. And even like Kevin Spacey as Luthor, it's like, well, I get it. You want to now kind of course correct from the cartoony Gene Hackman portrayal, which I disagree with, but fine.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't work.
It doesn't really work. I mean, there are some like little attempts at humor that I think sort of score some points now and then, but it just kind of felt like no one really knew exactly why they were making this film. They just knew that they had to make it, and they knew that people love the Donner film, so let's try to emulate that as much as we could. I'm not sure there was some bold new direction being taken with it.
No, I agree. It sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement with these films. But yeah, it doesn't hold up to the promise of what the original was, and hence why beyond that they decided not to make a sequel, even though they obviously set things up in that film for a potential sequel, but that was sort of in development hell for some years, and then they just decided to go ahead and do an entire reboot. And I absolutely 100% agree with what you said at the beginning, Charles. I think Henry Cavill is almost like the perfect person of today that they could have cast as Superman. I think he looks the part. I like what he does with the role and everything. And even though there were a lot of problems with Man of Steel, I did kind of respect what Zack Snyder did in the fact that he did try and make something that was completely different to the Donner films, where everybody else had always whether it was with the theme music or the look, or they'd always kind of gone with what Donner had done so brilliantly. That he did choose to move away and do something different and have a different vision of Krypton, and try a lot of other things with it. Although I've got problems with it. I don't think it was necessarily successful, but I do think it's sad that Henry Cavill is talking about leaving the role.
Well,
you go, Simon, for a change.
Okay, I was going to say, I think both Superman Returns and Man of Steel suffers from being in the shadow of the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, because those films did so well. They felt that Superman had to be darker and moodier, which was never what Superman was about. It's because they do this whole kind of broken timeline with Man of Steel, so it's aping kind of what they did in Batman Begins, and so you have that scene after Clark has saved the school bus, and he's talking to Jonathan Kent, Kevin Costner, about did I do a bad thing, and it's like Kevin Costner was like, well, maybe you shouldn't have done anything. You should have let those kids die, just to sort of hide who you are. And I think that kind of stuff always sort of didn't sit very well with me, because you take the original Superman, a similar scene where he's raced against the train, which is such a glorious scene. It's like, even today, it's like, it's done so well, the fact that it's all practical. And Jonathan Kent say, well, son, you weren't here to kick a football. You were put on this earth to do something. And then, with Man of Steel, it's like, well, maybe you should not do anything. Maybe you should just hide and not let anybody know who you are. And, that kind of stuff didn't sort of sit with me very well. I mean, the fact that the deaths of Jonathan Kent in both films are so different. I mean, so in the original Superman, he has a heart attack, and that's heartbreaking, because that could happen to anybody's parent. You could be, I mean, the fact that he was just talking to him, and he has that heart attack, and he dies, and Clark feels like he can't do anything about it. And then you get Man of Steel, where it's like, tornado! And Jonathan's like puts his hand out and goes, don't save me. And just like, it's so awful. I was just like, oh man. It's like, well, we got to do something bigger, don't we? What can we do? Tornado.
Yeah, I mean, much as I love Kevin Costner, I agree it wasn't up to the the Glenn Ford stuff from the original.
Yeah.
No.
You know what? Can I just say Costner is wonderful in Man of Steel. I mean, when I can't remember the exact line, but when young Clark is like, "Can I just go back to being like your son again?" or whatever, he goes and Costner says, "You are my son," and his voice breaks when he says it. I think that was in the trailer, and I kind of teared up. I mean, it was such a wonderful delivery of that. Yeah, I mean, Man of Steel, I loved the stuff on Krypton in the beginning. I thought that was a really great sort of very alien, very kind of out there, almost rock opera looking, version of Krypton.
Yeah.
With the little penis pods that send Zod and his bad guys up into space. I don't know what the hell that was about, but okay, fine. But I thought Russell Crowe was a really good Jor-El. I mean, it had a lot of really great new kind of re-energized elements. And you both know, I mean, to me, John Williams is a god, and there's no touching his original score. However, I thought Hans Zimmer did a brilliant job of his own. I mean, he really delivered, I thought, an amazing score that had nothing to do with what John Williams was doing. It's radically different, and yet still served the character, and sort of like both the heroism and the responsibility, and even brought back some of the joy, like when Superman is learning how to fly. and he kind of blows it the first time, but then the second time he figures it out, and like he's so happy about it. And that cue on the soundtrack, it's called Flight, is one of the best sort of like, I don't know, uplifting pieces of music I've ever heard Hans Zimmer create. So there's elements in Man of Steel which I love. I mean, I really, really love. But then, yeah, it gets a little sloppy and messy with how things work with, the Kryptonian powers on Earth and how they're adapting to it, and the atmosphere and the sun, and it's like a little bit too much science being discussed with how the powers work and how they adjust. And just, I don't know, just the plan was maybe not always as clean and easy as it should have been for a movie like this. But having said that, I think that it's a decent reboot. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in it. And I think it's certainly better than what came after, at least in terms of it being faithful to the character, and it gave Superman kind of what he needed to exist with a modern audience. Because I don't think the Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner version would play to kids today necessarily. Maybe it would, I don't know. But I feel like this whole notion of it's kind of a darker, scarier world, so everything has to adjust accordingly is an unfortunate reality that we might be dealing with. I really hope these things aren't true, but they seem to be, because that's just what's happening. But this is a really weird aside, but have you guys seen the new Coen Brothers movie yet? The Ballad of Buster Scruggs?
Not yet, but
I have not.
I've got it queued up on Netflix.
I don't want to spoil it, but there's it's like an anthology movie. There's like 5 or 6 stories, and there's one in there which sums up what you're talking about in terms of the need to keep upping the stakes of spectacle and like keep wowing the audience, and you have to keep kind of complicating it and making it more ridiculous and more just bigger and better than the last thing. And I probably shouldn't even spoil it then, but there's this bit where there's a traveling performer, and he has a handler played by Liam Neeson, and he just gives these beautiful soliloquies and speeches, and it's very simple. It's like he's a really great speaker, and people love listening to him talk. But then it's almost like after 3 or 4 of those shows, the audiences get smaller and smaller, the applause dwindles down to nothing, and then suddenly there's this new thing down the road, which is a chicken that can do math. Okay, it's kind of like that sums up to me what like modern like blockbuster film. It's like, what's the new chicken that can do math?
I love it. Oh, that's that. Yeah, I mean that's on my on my back of the list, so I'll have to check that out for sure. But yeah, I mean with Man of Steel, I have to be honest, I was loving it for like the first at least 2/3 of the film, if not more. I was really liking the differences and liking the choices that had been made with it. My problem simply got, and again, it's back to exactly what you're saying, Simon, about everything has to be bigger and better than it was. And, the spectacle with the whole sort of, let's have a fight and essentially destroy his hometown of Smallville. And then let's take that fight to Metropolis and destroy half the city and all of this stuff. Whereas in the original, or in Superman 2, he simply, as soon as he started seeing people getting hurt, he flew to the Fortress of Solitude to take it all away from people in harm's way. And that was the point that I thought this film missed. And it's interesting that they then ended up making that a plot point for the film that followed,
Batman v Superman.
Batman v Superman, because they made the criticism they had about the amount of collateral damage and fallout of that. They obviously made that Batman's or Bruce Wayne's motivation in that film. But yeah, I thought in terms of Man of Steel as a film in its own right, they got 3/4 of it really done really well, and they just, if you like, ruined it in that last act for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, Superman did most of the damage at some point. I mean, the fact when he's punching and dragging Zod through buildings and stuff, and it's just like there's no consequences to it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I hated that.
Yeah,
it was a really vogue thing for a few years there. I mean, I know we're not going back that far now, but it seemed that every major movie franchise or every blockbuster movie that came out had to have some sort of city destruction landscape because technology was good enough to do that, in the computer now. And but I just thought, in terms of actual storytelling, I compare it to what you're saying about, Glenn Ford having a heart attack and Kevin Costner getting swept up in a tornado. It's like they had to go bigger with it, and I don't think they necessarily needed to. I think had he flown to the Fortress of Solitude, even though that's been done before, but to do that and show it differently would have been a lot more compelling, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's this weird thing. I think when the sort of destruction of a city is done well, it can be very powerful, but they never seem to do it very well. The film that springs to mind when anybody talks about destruction of a city, I think Akira.
Mm-hmm.
I think of that film and the destruction of Neo Tokyo. That is gut wrenching. The scene, the destruction on that scale, you feel it, even though Neo Tokyo is really scummy. If anywhere should have been wiped off the face of the earth is Neo Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see like Metropolis being half destroyed, or San Francisco into darkness, it doesn't feel like there's any consequences. I mean, the fact that at the end of Man of Steel you see Clark Kent turning up for work at the Daily Planet, and it doesn't look like the city's been touched. And same again with Into Darkness. I know it's a couple of years, it's supposedly like a year or so later when you see Kirk give his speech after he recovered with that small brush with death. He just had a slight case of death. But there's no consequences, and that's where it kind of fell. So I mean, yeah, you can do all this stuff now in a computer, or you can do it practically, but you don't feel it. I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, it's it could have been a great film. I mean, it had the bits in there to do it, but it just overall, when it came together, it was kind of lacking. It's a shame.
Well, I think this is around the time when fans started and critics started making a note that DC was trying to reverse engineer Marvel. And, Marvel had taken these very methodical steps to slowly and gradually build their characters, and they're like the bench of their team, basically. And so we got to know all these characters so that when you finally did bring them together, there was meaning to it, and we cared and we liked them, and we liked seeing how they interacted with each other, how the sparks would fly, and so on and so forth. And I think, and not just DC, but I think other franchises as well, just they saw that crazy Marvel money and they went nuts, and they said, we have to do the same thing. Yes. How can we do it as quickly as possible? So, I hate to use the word like unearned because that gets thrown around pretty easily, but I do feel like, that maybe if they had just pumped the brakes a little bit and just taken a little bit more time to build these relationships before throwing these characters together, it might have served them better in the long term, because as we know by now, they all kind of hit the fan in Justice League, because it was just not planned for this way. It was rushed in long term, terms. It was just they just did not plan for it the way Marvel did, and they, here's to say, maybe they didn't, or they couldn't for whatever reason. They just had to get to Justice League for whatever stockholders' demands were or whatever. But I just feel like, man, it's just a shame, because those characters are so great, and I would love to have seen Superman, Batman, Flash, Wonder Woman, all these characters together. But when they finally did come together, it felt so sketched. The fact that half or more of the Justice League were established basically through emails. And I forget which movie it was. The convenient logo on each person's dossier.
Yeah, Batman v Superman. That was with Wonder Woman's email with all the little videos. And again, I agree 100% with what you're saying. They didn't earn it. I know everybody bats that around, and I get that. But it is such a shame, because I wanted to love those movies because I love those characters. But I honestly think that with DC stuff, I think they've done a much better job on network television, of all things, than they've actually done with the movies, which is a bit of a shame, really.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, because originally they were going to do Man of Steel 2, and then they scrapped that to do Batman v Superman. They felt, hey, we've still got Batman. Batman's money. Let's bring Batman in. And then they decided to do a mashup of Dark Knight Returns and Death of Superman. Mm-hmm. And that was just an absolute mess. And also the fact that, I just really didn't like their version of Batman. I mean, the fact that he just, went around and if he wasn't branding people with his back mark, he was gunning people down with his machine guns and stuff. I mean, it was just, I don't know, there was nothing in the story to sort of say why he was going harder. It just didn't, it was just so rushed, so forced, and stuff in the scripts, we all laugh about. I mean, the whole Martha, why do you say that name? It's
I mean, it's unfortunate. They tried to do something different, but at the same time, they absolutely tried to copy,
Marvel.
What Marvel have spent a decade setting up.
Yeah.
So, or at least, by the time the first Avengers came out, they'd had 3 or 4 movies or standalone movies before that, and it is a shame. But who knows what they're going to do next? We're going to get... Well, DC don't seem to know what it's doing, because from the sounds of it, we're going to get all sorts of different strands of things now. Like, we've got a Joker movie coming that's not related to any of this, and we've got another one that is related to it. And, it's all over the shop at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how... Well, I think, didn't they say they're kind of abandoning the coordinated shared universe, and now they're just going to make the films they want to make? To your point, where Joker is not really related to what's happening in the Snyderverse. We are going to get Wonder Woman 1984. We're obviously getting Aquaman very soon. That I hear is really good. So it sounds like maybe they're just going to make movies and not bother with the shared universe architecture that Marvel has really focused heavily on. It seems like DC will just go back to let's just make cool movies we want to make, and hopefully they'll work. Which is not necessarily a bad approach given what's transpired. So and maybe one day they'll take a couple years off, and they'll do a new reboot and start over. But
I'm sure they will.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you really do need kind of like a Kevin Feige type figurehead to oversee this stuff, because it's someone who can not only wrangle the studio politics and all the personalities involved and all the directors and their prima donna visions and all these things. You need someone who understands story and the long-term kind of arc of it all and where it's all leading towards. And you can look 10 years down the road and say, okay, this is an event we have to prepare for. So how many movies, how many characters, how many things do we have to put into play first, and make those things great so they're successful and people want to see more of it, and then pay that off with an Infinity War type, climax. And that is Herculean. I mean, it's amazing that they have pulled that off, and it's not for everybody, Yeah. And by the way, certain characters might not be right for it. The DC universe might not be right for that type of buildup. Maybe it's better that they're all individual films with unique visions and different directors and different styles, and you have to pace it out. That's my thing, and that goes to Star Wars as well. Like Star Wars, when we were facing having the prospect of a movie a year, either an episode or a story, a Star Wars story. I mean, as a Star Wars nerd, that sounds amazing. It sounds like Christmas every morning. But at some point, the event of it starts to fade because you realize, oh, there'll be another one next year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that is something you have to weigh, that people just need to pace themselves as viewers and not just filmmakers pacing themselves as filmmakers. It's like there's all a good timing for all this, and different franchises have different needs and different ways they can play out and be successful. And they're not all equal. Like, you should not be copying Marvel's playbook. You shouldn't be copying Star Wars playbook. You shouldn't be copying DC's playbook. You should be doing your own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the studios are sort of chasing that money now. They have fewer and fewer properties that are actually bringing the money in. So the properties they do have, they are squeezing every penny they can get out of them until, they run dry. I mean, it's such a shame. I see it happening to Star Wars that, there's more and more and more stuff coming out. We've got TV series, we've got other cartoons. They'll just keep going with it until people stop watching. And I do wonder what's going to happen to studios, because they're pumping tons of money into these sort of tentpole films, but yet they're bringing back in less and less money, and with the actual sort of franchises are getting less and less. So there's going to be a breaking point at some point, in the future, or everything's just going to be owned by Disney.
Yeah.
Well, at this rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? But I mean, it's right back to the thing that we were saying at the beginning, that we used to have to, back in our day, we had to be patient and wait. And, sometimes it was 2 to 4 years between the movies. And, like I said, that 4-year period of those films I mentioned at the beginning, that seems all compressed in my mind anyway. There was always, every year there was something to enjoy, and something different to enjoy. That's a real shame. But
well, I mean, I think they just need to, give a bit more time to these processes. I mean, the scripts are being churned out very quickly, it feels like, and I think sometimes they need to spend a bit more time on the writing, the storytelling, because I mean, they can do the spectacle, they can do the effects really well, but when it comes to the story and characters, sometimes it's kind of lacking. Or
story and character is everything. Absolutely.
And and as we talked about with directors being replaced, and even after they've finished shooting the film, it's kind of like it's sad to see a director's vision then being kind of taken away and changed. I was going to use the word mutilated, but sometimes it has worked out better than what the film's turned out to be. But as a filmmaker myself, it's kind of worrying that thing that you envisioned, the film that you set out to make, a studio could come along and say, well, we're not happy with it because it's not this or this, and so we're just going to take it away and turn it into something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all want their IPs, and it's all done by committee nowadays. But there you go. So Charles, obviously you wanted to come on and specifically talk about Superman the movie. As I said, it's scary to think that it's going to be 40 years old anytime soon. Have you, I mean, like I said at the beginning, I'm really pleased that you asked us to come on and do this, because it often feels very sort of self-indulgent, and we have these sort of esoteric little conversations and stuff. But I mean, have you covered what you wanted to on this, or is there any other aspect that we've not really touched on? I know it's a huge subject, but is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I mean, just in regards to Superman the movie, I definitely want to talk more about The Last Jedi. I thought we could, no? Wow.
Maybe we'll have
look, I think Superman the movie is as great today as it was in 1978, because it has a pure heart to it. It doesn't pretend to be anything it isn't. It's just there to make you feel good, to give you a great time, to tell a compelling story, to have you fall in love with all of these characters, and to leave the theater feeling not just good about the movie you just saw or good about yourself, but good about the world, and our place in it, and maybe try to find a better way forward. And I think in these quote unquote dark times we're in, because I feel like it's been dark for a while, but it seems like it's darker and darker every day. I feel like a film like Superman the movie gives you hope. It's like that we will pull out of this and we will find our own way forward, and that we are good people. We just lack the light to show the way. I feel like that is what is much needed, and I hope that movies don't forget that lesson, that it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be dark and badass and all these cool things the kids seem to like. It's like it can be a little cheesy and it can be a little corny, and it's okay, because we're human, we're imperfect, and Superman to me crystallizes that. And the thing I love about Christopher Reeve's Superman also is that he is so much like us. I mean, he is kind of, imperfect and kind of a nerd and kind of like, he means well, but he doesn't always, make the best decisions, but he'll make up for it. If he makes a mistake, he will come back. He'll go to the fortress. He'll find that magic crystal and he'll get his powers back, and he'll come back and save the day somehow. But he'll walk, in real time to the Fortress of Solitude and get that crystal. So, I think just the dedication and determination of that character is inspiring, and the fact that it's meant to be totally selfless, and he's willing to sacrifice so much for other people is a really great message. And even though we may not perfectly pull that off day to day, just the fact that we can try and just try to think in those terms, I think that makes Superman the movie an essential film, frankly. An essential genre film. And if you love comic books and if you love fantasy and science fiction and action, it's got all of that and then some.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. End of speech.
Love it. No, I agree with everything you said there. Absolutely. Yeah. Really, that's probably a good note to end it on then, isn't it?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think a film that's 40 years old is still like the template for a lot of superhero origin films. Mm-hmm. It set the gold standard of how you do a comic book film, and still now to this day they're copying that same formula, and but in some ways I don't feel they've ever bettered it, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's in a way it was almost too successful, because I think the notion that every comic book movie feels the need to do an origin story, even if we just saw the origin story 2 movies back, I think everyone wants that kind of world building, high. I'm speaking about the filmmakers. It's like they want to be the ones to say, here's our version of that.
Yeah.
And that's why, like with so many Batman movies, you had, whether it was a 5-minute sequence or a 30-second sequence, we still had to see the Waynes go to the opera and then the pearls drop. And it's like, we still had to see that, and it's like, I don't know why, because we know the story. Yeah. And it's not like every sequel did it, but a few of them did, yeah. And Superman never fortunately had to revisit the origin until we got to Man of Steel, and it was so different, that was fine. I didn't feel cheated. I didn't feel like, okay, we're reliving what we saw with the 78 film. So it definitely set the template, and probably too well. It's like, I think that's the thing, is people look at that film as the gold standard, like you said, and I wish that they would try to avert their eyes from the blinding glory that is Superman the movie, and then try some of their own things, and try different paths, because I think there's a lot of uncharted territory.
Yes. Yeah.
And by the way, one last thing about John Williams, really quick, because I'm a huge John Williams nut. I've seen John Williams conduct live since 1980 was the first time I went to see him perform with an orchestra. And what I've noticed over the years, not so much lately, but like there was a period of like 10 or 15 years where I would go and see him at the Hollywood Bowl or somewhere else, but mostly the Hollywood Bowl. And he would do an entire evening of his most classic film scores, and he wouldn't do Superman the movie. He wouldn't do the Superman theme until the fourth or fifth encore. And I would always turn to my date and I would always say, that is how badass John Williams is. He can wait till the fifth encore to bust out Superman the movie. like the body of his work is so incredible that he would bring out one of his top tier scores or themes, and the audience goes nuts because you think, oh, it's all done. We've heard all the greatest hits, and then fifth encore, and it's like dun, 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 and the place goes ape shit. They go nuts, and it's like that kind of like just joy that he brought to the franchise cannot be measured. I mean,
no, I agree. I too have been lucky enough to see John Williams at the Hollywood Bowl, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and I get the goosebumps every single time. So, yes.
Oh, bloody hell. I'm the only one who hasn't seen John Williams at the Hollywood Bowl. I've been left out here.
I remember, though, when we went to that Mark Kermode Cue the Music thing that time. I remember, though, it was excellent when they did Superman. Remember, they did that, and they did the full... the full, not the full score, but the all of the different themes, in that, like the sort of finale one, and it blew the house down, didn't it?
Oh, it did, yeah.
Got into that. It was amazing. So yeah, it's such a great theme, and like Donna says, you can almost hear the word Superman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, totally can.
Yeah.
You totally can.
Yeah. Fabulous. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, I suppose we have gone as long as we've gone as long as the theatrical cut of
yes,
Superman,
we have. Yes.
Or is it the director's cut?
No. Director's cut is 2 hours 30 minutes, so we're under it. We're under it.
So we've gotten to that time. Charles, is there anything that you want to I've got one final question actually.
Oh.
You're the man that does all of the, the wonderful behind the scenes documentaries and stuff that we love so much. That's on the Blu-rays and the DVDs and stuff. Do you ever wish you did the one for Superman?
Oh, of course, sure, yes, absolutely. And it's a shame now because we've lost so many of the key players. So to do it now, you'd have to rely on archival footage and interviews other people have done, which is, it's fine. But no, that would be a wonderful alternate past to jump back into and be able to do Superman the movie for sure.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because, I like to tell very candid, honest stories about the making of films because I believe it's more of a celebration at the end of it because these people, whatever conflicts or clashes there were, they overcame those problems and they delivered a classic, right? And therefore the victory is sweeter because of that versus everyone's a genius, everything's great, no problems on this film. Then then why don't I just go back and watch the film? Why do I care about the making of? So Superman and by extension Superman 2 would have a very interesting, I think, honest, journalistic documentary if I were to have been able to do it. I just don't know if would have been allowed. But I do think it would have been a really interesting doc to do, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. And is there anything exciting that you're currently working on that you want to share or that you're able to share?
I'm in this really strange holding period, waiting to start the behind the scenes content for. I probably shouldn't say, but I'll say this: it's the newest installment in an existing franchise. I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Wow.
And I'm looking forward to it. It's just that for whatever reason, I'm waiting to get started on it. But that'll be later this next year. And then I have something I'm just dying to tell you about, but I'm going to wait until I sign the contract and it's official. But
yeah.
But very, very likely there's something awesome on the way. And the next time we talk, I'll hopefully be able to tell you about it.
I was going to say, we'll have you back to talk about it, right? You'd be happy to do that. Yeah. Cool.
And then Yeah, exactly. And then I have my next feature that I'm dying to get going, and I'm hoping that the thing I can't talk about will actually help that second feature going, which is a medieval horror film that I've been trying to make for a while. And I love the script. I'm really excited about it. Actually, I did a test shoot for it earlier this year just to kind of get the look down, just because I had to do something to show people what I had in mind. So it gets positive reaction. It's just we're in this era of like your movie either has to be $100 million or $500,000, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that's my quandary at the moment. But yeah. So I'm very vague at the moment. I apologize. I usually like to tell you specifics, but hopefully next time.
All right. Well, as I said, we're delighted that you suggested this particular topic and that you've come and joined us to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for indulging me, and for anyone who hasn't seen Superman the movie in a while, I hope they go back and revisit it on its 40th birthday.
Absolutely. Hopefully it will get some sort of limited release here, I'm hoping.
I believe it is. I believe it's having a very brief theatrical run.
Yeah, so we have that here. We have across the country. There's 3 days. I think it was like they had the first one already, and then they have 2 more maybe coming up of nationwide screenings, along with some bonus content. And they're showing one of the Max Fleischer shorts as well before it.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay, yeah. No, I'll be there. I mean, lately they've been showing on limited runs the new restored 4K versions of many of John Carpenter's films, and I've been absolutely loving, even though I know these films back to front, to go and see them on the big screen again is just it's just wonderful. So I will be doing that with Superman also, for sure. And you should treat yourself to it, Simon, as you've never seen it on the big screen.
Yes, that's true. So, Keith, where can people find out more about your work?
Okay, well, if you go to YouTube and put in British Eyles, that's Eyles, there's some short films there that I've written, produced, and directed. And also, I am currently part of an award-winning web series called Rebecca Gold. So if you, again, go onto YouTube and put in Rebecca Gold web series, all 5 episodes are up, and I think it runs a total of about 30 minutes to see the whole season 1. And I don't know what's happening with that in terms of whether it's going to get a season 2 or not. But congratulations to Ian David Diaz, the director, writer of that, and all of the team that helped us produce that one. So check it out.
And as always, you can find out more about my work at independentrunnings.com. You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and all good podcast providers. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. And please leave us a rating and review. It all helps. So thank you again, Charles, for coming on. And I think if you're up for it, I know you're up for it. I think we should do a Last Jedi podcast. It's been a year. I think it's time to revisit it.
I'll look back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so let's start. All right, here we go.
And then 4 hours later.
Oh dear. Yes, love it.
Yes.
All right.
And
well, this was fun though. I mean, thank you for indulging me, and yes, I'm always game for Last Jedi chat. But anything else, just let me know if I can do it. I'm happy to help out.
Anyway, up and away. Up and away. See you later.